To this plenary session of Peace by Design, a reporting out on the workshops on finding peace in our cities, drawing upon the insights of designers, planners, architects, artists, and community members. In so many cities around the world, the people there do not know peace. Whether it's in my hometown, Chicago, Sana'a in Yemen, Aleppo in Syria, or in Tegucigalpa, Honduras. Honduras has one of the highest murder rates in the world, fueled by corruption, impunity of crime, gangs, poverty, and a lack of access to basic resources. Tegucigalpa, like so many cities around the world, does not know peace. We begin this plenary session with music from Cien Años, a band whose name in Spanish means 100 years. The band founded an arts collective in Tegucigalpa, the city between mountains. My colleagues, Kate Reinhardt, Mary Laurel True, and Omar Mixco have moved some mountains to bring Cien Años today, and it is no small miracle that the band is here, while in deep grief, as we're all missing the beloved co-founder. Lead singer Gustavo Moreno faced many threats over the years, but he continued to speak out against violence, human rights abuses, and to share the healing power of the pursuit of happiness through art and music. 1 month ago, Gustavo Moreno died tragically, a devastating loss for his brother, lead singer Leonardo Moreno, their family and friends, and the arts and human rights community in Honduras. But with Gustavo's life-giving spirit, Cien Años carries on his message of peace. Today we are so grateful that they will share their song Evolución, about building bridges across difference, learning to co-create lasting changes for good, a song about making peace in our cities. Ladies and gentlemen, my colleague Kate Reinhardt will introduce the band.
It is an extreme pleasure for me to introduce the band members to you today. We have Jose Antonio Velázquez on piano, Jonathan Alarcón on drums, Carlos Umaña on bass, Omar Mixco guitar, Peter Mack percussion, and the lead singer Leonardo Moreno. I give you Cien Años. I am so sorry. I forgot Sisi Maradiaga, viola. Muy importante. So sorry.
Revoluciona el pensamiento, revoluciona la manera de sentir el bien. Revolución no es sesgarse en sistemas obsoletos, en levantar bandera por discursos de panfletos. Ser de consciente y no sonetos del poeta, sujeta al cantor, las manos del pintor y el escultor que hace que vueles, 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 que hace que vueles. Que sé que hueles, 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 que sé que hueles. revoluciona la imaginación. Evolución, 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 revoluciona el corazón. Evolución, 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 revoluciona la imaginación. Evolución es el amor en tiempo de guerra, es la flor que nace en la trinchera. Revolución es decir no a quien no te quiere y resistirse al amargo eso breve. Y aunque te mueve, muere por caricias leves. Y aunque te mojes el paraguas cuando llueve, que sé que vueles, 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 que sé que vueles. Evolución, 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 evoluciona el corazón. Evolución, 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 revoluciona la imaginación. Evolución, 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 revoluciona el corazón. Evolución, 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 revoluciona esta canción. Abba Harei, Abba Anigi, Abba Harei, Abba Anigi are in Garifuna language one of our ethnic groups, means unity, means all people around the world unit by one big heart. So this is our message. The revolution of love. The revolution of love. Say evolución, evolución. Evoluciona el corazón. Evolución, evolución. Evoluciona la imaginación. Evolución, evolución. Evoluciona el corazón. Evolución, evolución. Evoluciona esta canción. Evolución, evolución, evolución. Evoluciona el corazón. Quiero en esta noche dedicar esta canción. I want to dedicate this song for them, for the girls, for empower the girls in all that system of machism and patriarchalism. This is why, this is what it is, this is the rap music. Es la sonrisa sincera del niño de la sierra que se aferra a su tierra y hace que vueles. Esa lucha merecida de la mujer es su color, de la indígena a la negra ante el violador. Es el valor, Visitación, Padilla, Berta Cáceres, Lucia Magamero de Medina, Clementina Suárez, Juana la Loca, Yanarela Vélez. Que sé que vueles, que sea que abueles, identificar al opresor y al oprimido, unir de cantos, unirse en luchas, unirse en gritos. Evolución, evolución, revoluciona el corazón. Evolución, evolución, revoluciona esta canción. Evolución, evolución, revoluciona el corazón. Evolución, evolución, revoluciona la imaginación. Evolución, 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 revoluciona el corazón. Evolución. Gracias.
Elijah, if you take that chair. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Steve Kelly, and I'm a senior fellow at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs and serving as moderator for our panel this afternoon. And the organizers of the forum warned me that we were going to be following literally a tough act to follow. And I think Cien Años proved that to be the case. We have with us this afternoon Elijah Anderson to my right, who is the William K. Landman Jr. Professor of Sociology and Professor of African American Studies at Yale University. He's the recipient of numerous awards, the author of several books, including, most relevant for our conversation today, The Cosmopolitan Canopy, Race and Civility in Everyday Life, and also relevant to the theme of this conference, was served on the National Research Council's panel on the understanding and control of violent behavior. We are expecting Commissioner Tony Carter, who was delayed by bad weather in northern Minnesota. But we have with us, filling in temporarily for Commissioner Carter, her assistant, Noel Nix, who has his master's in urban and regional planning from the Humphrey School of Public Affairs and has worked in a variety of public roles and served as the commissioner's assistant for a number of years. And he was also a participant in our conversations on Peace by Design over the last couple days. Next. Next is Kim Norton. Representative Norton served in the Minnesota House of Representatives from 2007 through 2016, representing a substantial part of the city of Rochester, Minnesota. She also served as the assistant majority leader in the House during her term. She has been active in the Destination Medical Center project in Rochester, and she will explain more about that in her remarks as part of the panel. She's currently pursuing additional education as a result of winning one of the prestigious Bush Foundation fellowships. So we're glad that she could be with us today. And my colleague Tom Fisher is the Dayton Hudson Chair in Urban Design at the University of Minnesota. He served 19 years as the Dean of the College of Design and currently is the Director of the Minnesota Design Center. Tom is a prolific author, and we are co-teaching a course together on global venture design. So we appreciate Tom's being here as well. Thank you. We want to make sure to have a mechanism for taking questions from the audience. So if you are comfortable with Twitter, you can tweet a question to hashtag NPPF, but be sure to include the term Peace by Design or Peace X Design so that we can select your questions from the broader Twitter stream, and in the later part of the program we'll try to incorporate them into the questions for our panel. I want to start off with a question to Elijah. You've identified the role of cosmopolitan canopies where people share space in peace across differences. Some of those spaces appear to have grown organically over time. How can we intentionally create more or broader cosmopolitan canopies?
Well, that's a good question for sure. The canopy is an island of civility located in a sea of segregated living. And over time, these places emerge and persist, and people come to use them, like them, sometimes feel at peace in these spaces. These spaces are spaces of cultural convergence, where all different kinds of people come together. And they come from rather particularistic settings sometimes. Sometimes they come from parochial settings. And when they come to the canopy, I mean, the canopy is a space that encourages civility. It encourages a kind of cosmopolitan orientation. And so even if one is coming from a parochial environment or ethnocentric environment, that person is oftentimes encouraged to be civil and to be respectful of difference, you see. And that's a great thing. All of us, to some extent, are cosmo, and all of us, maybe to some extent, are maybe a little bit ethnocentric. The canopy encourages us to express our cosmo side and to keep the ethno in check. Keep the ethno in check. And the canopy is really a metaphor for civil society. It's the kind of society our rabbis, our ministers, our coaches, our school teachers, our principals, our mothers and fathers have encouraged us to participate in, to show our better sides, to be polite to strangers, to others, you see, even to be politically correct. And that isn't a pejorative term at all, I believe. But this is what is necessary. And you see, a city's made up of all kinds of people oftentimes. I mean, pluralism is a major theme of our society. But another way of thinking about pluralism is to think about it as a situation in which people are competing. Many people are competing for place and position, oftentimes on the basis of their particularities, you see. Ethnicity, race, those kinds of things. And to the extent that there is a kind of distributive justice, that is, people feel they have what they have because they work for what they worked and they've got what they deserve, things are fine. The problem comes in these circumstances, or the circumstances in which there is huge inequality, you see. And it's not just inequality, but it's the sense of inequality. A lot of our economists and others who have all these statistics about this kind of thing oftentimes don't talk about the perception of inequality, the sense of that, you see. And that is so critical, so critical. Now, it so happens that many of these canopies, until now, have functioned, you know, and we don't know the future, of course, but today we are running into special challenges with rising inequality. That's a major one. And I think that this new challenge is something that could could harm the canopy, as it were. And I think the sense of distributive justice maybe has encouraged the development over the years of the canopies. And maybe that's one of the things that helps it to be, if you will. Again, these are islands of civility and diversity oftentimes, located in a sea of racial segregation where people come together and call time out, and they act real nice across racial and ethnic lines. But there are stresses and strains which then manifest as fault lines, I think.
So Noel, over the last couple of days in our Peace by Design dialogue, we used as a case study the Rondo neighborhood, which was divided by the construction of the I-94 interstate highway. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the challenges facing that community and also sort of the signs of hope that design and infrastructure might provide.
So to give a little bit of background, I've worked for the past couple of years as the assistant to Commissioner Carter, and she, when she first heard about this conversation about the idea of a land bridge, the idea of doing something new and innovative within the Rondo geography, that immediately resonated with her. And it's exciting because it takes place within the context of broader thinking about the future of I-94. And so we really have to commend MnDOT for their leadership and Commissioner Zelli because they are really, I think, recognizing that one of the central challenges of planning and one of the central challenges that we have in the Twin Cities is that what we do is as important as how we do it. And so the challenge within Rondo is not just that you have a geography that was devastated by the creation of the highway, that was done in a way that fundamentally and completely lacked public participation, but also that it is in many ways a community that has been in transition, particularly over the past 15 to 20 years, as there's been renewed investment and renewed attention in the urban core. You're seeing property values begin to rise, rents begin to rise, new businesses open up that serve a clientele that might not necessarily match the demographics of the folks who historically have called the neighborhood home. And so in the midst of that, you have this question about, well, we have this 50-year-old highway and we gotta do something different with it. And so Reconnect Rondo, Ramsey County, the city of St. Paul have really been at the table thinking about, okay, as we think about the future of I-94 and the future of this community, how can a highway be more than just a highway and be more than just an artificial barrier within a community? So I worked briefly at the Metropolitan Council and had an opportunity to spend probably far too much time in the archives and the library there, and found a copy of the Planning Commission report that was written at the time that the highway was originally being proposed and was going to be built. And that document basically laid out 3 fundamental principles for determining whether or not to build a highway. 1, what's good for cars, that's literally what it says. 2, what's good for the community. And then 3, cost. And so cost obviously wasn't a question because the feds were picking up 90% of the tab. Clearly there was a supremacy of cars and those who passed through the community over those who called the community home. And there was a brief acknowledgement within that report that discriminatory practices around housing are concerned and may cause some issues, and somebody should do something about that, right? And so now it's exciting that we have a process that in many ways is fundamentally different because it's leading with the questions about community and leading with thinking about what are we trying to accomplish here and who are we trying to serve, and then making planning decisions based out of that.
And for people in the audience who may not know very much about the project, when we refer to a land bridge, it is not just a somewhat wider bridge to carry traffic. In this case, it would be a bridge that's 1/2 mile long and would produce about 16 acres of new land above the highway, and could be planted with trees and garden. And but it also sounds like one of the key things going forward in terms of thinking about peace by design is to put people at the center of the process instead of cars at the center of the process?
That's it, right? And thinking holistically about who is the community. And one of the really important points that I think need to be made is that there is a community of memory. So for those who don't know, Rondo was the historic African American community within St. Paul for a number of years before I-94 was built. And there are maps that you can literally look up and see where the federal government basically mapped out different parts of St. Paul and other cities, and right where I-94 goes through, that historical map labels Rondo as Negro slums, right? And so when you think about the fact that that this happened not just in St. Paul, but in Detroit, in Cleveland, in New Orleans, and cities across the country, at a national scale, we had planning processes that put the well-being of others over the folks who call those communities home. And so that's fundamentally what's exciting about this process, is it's finally turning the corner and turning that thinking on its head.
Kim, Rochester is working hard on the Destination Medical Center project. How do you see, and how do you think the project participants see peace being incorporated into the design for the future of the city of Rochester?
So first, I think I should not assume that everyone knows Rochester. I've been told everyone knows Mayo Clinic, and in fact, I find that true all the time. Even before I moved to Minnesota, people knew Mayo Clinic, but they didn't know that it was in Rochester. So Rochester, when I moved there, was a community of about 80,000 people, a little less than that, in 1990. It's 75 miles south of the Twin Cities region, and it was kind of a sleepy, small town. With the Destination Medical Center project, which was a Mayo initiated with our city and our county project to help improve our community, to build up the downtown region that surrounded the Mayo Clinic, because Mayo Clinic was finding it was difficult to get people to move there because we were kind of boring, to be honest. And people, when they were trying to get them to become employed, they're physicians and researchers, and they had spouses who were also, perhaps highly educated, but there was nothing for them to do once they got to Rochester. So they were trying to change this, as well as patients who came. And unlike other hospitals, perhaps people come not just for days or weeks, but sometimes months or even a year, and stay in our community, and they were bored, and they needed more. So this idea was DMC would transform Rochester. Well, Mayo Clinic often talks about Rochester as being the city for health, and that's part of the goal with DMC. We're going to be the city for health. We'll transform it. It'll become this wonderful place to visit or be a patient or live. And kind of my twist on that is, yes, we need to be a city for health, but we also need to be a healthy city. So as I see what peace means in our community and in that Destination Medical Center region, it needs to be developed, and it will be over the next 20 years, it's just starting, creating a healthy environment, a safe environment, an environment where people come together and collide, patients as well as community members, and there's a lot of tension in Rochester. Is this just for patients? Is it just for Mayo staff? Or how do we, as citizens who have spent our lives here, where do we fit in this picture? And so we have a little area that's used to be a road, now it's closed off, that links Mayo Clinic to kind of Broadway, the back of Broadway, which is our main street through town, and it's called Peace Plaza. It has a peace fountain in it, and it is our little gathering place. And I think as it's been interesting as we've talked about change that's coming, I don't think some of the developers are really understanding what that small little place, as our town has started to grow, has become really important to the people in our community, not just visitors who have open green space and a lovely little fountain, and we're a small town. That's really an important element of our community already. And I see development plans coming in with these great ideas, put in a splash pad that'll cover this whole area. Well, those are wonderful amenities, but what will it do to the space that we currently have where people go to be together? When there's a peaceful rally, when there's a protest, we go to Peace Plaza. When we want to sit outside and enjoy our Thursdays on First every summer, which is an outside craft and fair and farmers market type activity, everybody goes there. 20, 30,000 people go there on Thursdays in the summers. It's a big gathering place for everyone in our community, and everyone feels welcome. So as Rochester changes and grows, we need to respect the areas that already are there for our community and grow those out as the city grows and becomes more cosmopolitan, to keep those in the downtown area, as well as have them in the outside areas, our farmers markets, our community gardens, continue to make sure that those places outside the downtown area are there for people too. So those are just some of the thoughts, but health, peace, safety, places for people to come together are really going to be important for us.
Tom, you could talk about a wide variety of design projects, but over the last couple days, you were involved in the dialogue related to Peace by Design and some of our other case studies. What observations did you have from that day and a half of conversation about different ideas, dialogue, and government-community relations that might be relevant to how do we ensure peace in our cities?
Sure. Well, as a designer, it was really gratifying to see how great a job everybody did doing design thinking. Design thinking is this way in which basically the kinds of methods that we've used for thousands of years to design the environments and the products that we use every day is now being applied to systems or to communities or non-physical things. And in fact, there's the cover story in the Chronicle of Higher Education this week about design thinking and its ability to transform higher education. And so we were really using design thinking methods with the community of Rondo to imagine a different future for itself. And design thinking is really a mindset shift. A lot of conflict in cities, Commissioner Carter, hello, comes from a sense of that something's been taken away. Sometimes it's about conflict and confrontation. Sometimes there are ideological positions that are opposed to each other. And what design thinking helps communities to do is to recognize it's not about its deficits, but its assets. That its people and its history is a tremendous asset. It's about collaboration, it's about creativity, it's about empathy, really listening carefully and deeply to people. In the case of Rondo, this is a community that has been divided by that highway, but also traumatized by the way in which that community has been treated by MnDOT and by other governmental agencies. And so the workshops of the last couple days have really been wonderfully constructive, a kind of cosmopolitan canopy where there was great civility in the room as people from diverse backgrounds worked on this future for this neighborhood. A lot of it was recognizing that a lot of the solutions for the Rondo neighborhood probably lie outside the neighborhood itself, but also a lot of them are about reinvigorating that community, building its local economy, tapping all of the entrepreneurial assets of the people in the Rondo community. So we had some outside speakers. In fact, we talked about the Destination Medical Center and the notion of what is community health. We had a speaker from Lillehammer, Norway, talking about work on dialogue and the importance of dialogue as a way to overcome conflicts. We also had an interesting presentation from a colleague of mine who's a designer who has been working in cities turning police stations into polis stations, where the police station isn't a place that you fear and want to stay out of, but in fact is a place that you want to go to, where it has community resources, including putting basketball courts on the parking lots of police stations so that the community and the police can play basketball together, building those kinds of relationships. So with some of those ideas in mind, we formed 3 different teams of sort of design thinking teams, and we spent a couple days under Steve's very able guidance running us through a design thinking process, and came out with, I think, some really positive ideas that are action steps that we hope to report on at this event next year. So it's not just about talk, it's about doing things between now and then. One group came up with the idea of developing an ongoing dialogue as a process that would just be inherent in everything that happens in Rondo. And so no ideas get any more imposed on them, as happened with I-94, that every idea, everything that the government may have in mind for Rondo would start with dialogue, with everybody's voice being heard. Another team actually talked about mapping all of the assets of Rondo, making Rondo in some ways visible to itself, to help that community realize how rich it is in human asset, in natural assets, in physical assets, what have you, economic assets. And then the team I was on began to look at this idea of the entire Rondo neighborhood becoming an enterprise zone, a place of innovation where, like a planned urban development, a lot of the barriers for innovation that exist in our cities could be made much more flexible so that the people of Rondo could try new things, be it new kinds of energy strategies, new kinds of economic strategies, new sort of housing strategies, and that there at the center, at the land bridge, would be an entrepreneurial center that would enable the people of Rondo to develop the kind of entrepreneurial skills that they'll need to thrive in the 21st century. So that's a kind of quick overview of it.
Great, thank you. And we are happy to be joined by Commissioner Tony Carter, who arrived safely,
Yes,
thank
thank
goodness.
you very much.
Commissioner Carter was elected to the Ramsey County Board of Commissioners in 2005, and before that, she served on the St. Paul School Board. She is active nationally as well as locally. She's a member of the Board of Directors of the National Association of Counties and serves as chair of the association's Healthy Counties initiative. As with all of our panel members, much more could be said, but your timing is perfect, Commissioner. And so my sort of opening question to you is, the county gets involved in a variety of initiatives that include infrastructure, health, and a number of things. What are the ones that you think are most important for the purpose of bringing peace to the community, to the citizens served by Ramsey County?
Thank you very much. And first of all, I just have to say thanks for allowing me to climb in. As I walked in and I saw the design, this wonderful green, eclectic, electric design, I was wondering, what are we encouraging here? And so thank you for welcoming me. And I want to just note that our county and counties across all of the United States are involved in enhancing lives for people in so many different ways. As you said, yes, you can think about infrastructure and our engagement in making certain that our transportation system works for everyone, but also that we have built infrastructure in all regards that works. The infrastructure that we have is not just attended to by those systems that have just been mentioned, but also by our social service systems as well. We have a particular area of concern that I'd like to use as an example, which is for young people who may come into connection with our juvenile justice system. And the juvenile justice system is a place of interconnection. You know, it's a place where we meet. We meet those young people who may have offended or at least been accused of doing so. We also meet their families. And at that point of intersection, a child can go one way or another, and we consider that it should be our role to make sure that that meeting is a constructive and positive one, and that the next steps for that child and for the family as well are positive steps. So we have been working really hard with people in our community and metropolitan area of the state and throughout the nation in implementing a transformation called Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative. I don't know if people know about that, but just very briefly, the focus of JDAI is to make certain that when young people come into connection with our system, we are able to do positive things, to find alternatives that will help them build their lives toward that next best choice or the next best step. So that's a system design that really is about implementing peace in our relationship with young people. We've been able to reduce the number of young people who spend time in one of our facilities, our detention facility. So we've closed down pods and we're thinking about new design for that facility. But as we look into the system, we want to make sure we don't just stop in one place, but we look all down the highway. And one of the stops on that highway when young people may have offended could be an out-of-home placement for corrections purposes. So these are young people who go further and further into the system until it's assessed that they're not going to be able to be okay, to be safe at home for whatever set of reasons. They need a more serious intervention. We've been looking at how we make those decisions, and a system reform or system redesign that we are looking at is to be sure that we first do no harm. The science tells us that young people are safer and better when they're closer to their homes and communities, when they're able to be surrounded by natural supports. So as we look at what has been a residential facility for those young people, has been a facility that has housed 30 to 50 young people at a time, we're looking at the fact that that is old and it's kind of crumbling. It's not the place that we necessarily want those young people to be in, but not only because the building itself is kind of old, but because we're looking at new and more positive ways of ensuring those young people are in the community. So we want to be able to design the interventions that may require the system, but to rely on community resources and creativity to actually be the home for those young folks. Many may be able to stay with supports, although they may have had a serious offense in their homes, and others may be able to stay in smaller residences within the community. We're looking at totally redesigning that system for peace, and so it makes us think about the facilities and what they look like and what they feel like. And then it broadens our thinking beyond just those corrections facilities to, well, what about when people come to us in any regard? These are young people whose parents may be receiving some social supports, may need to find work, may need childcare, may need any number of things that they may go to one or the other, or, you know, disconnected and places located in different areas for. So we're thinking about how we make that more natural, that intervention, all of those interventions, how we make them more comprehensive so that they work together, how we make them multi-general, how we make them peaceful and next best step encounters where these young people and their families can come into connection, not only with those system resources that they need, but with the community and the natural supports that will be with them ongoing. There are other examples I've talked for a while, but I'd just like to say that, of course, the Dale Street Bridge, which is a project of our transportation or public works system in this case, is a really good example of how design should start with people. We're thinking about the people in JDAI, those young people, and then the facilities that serve them. Well, when we think about that facility, the bridge, we have to think about the history. We have to think about the needs and the voices of the people that are served. So our public works team is doing work in a totally generative and very different way than has been the culture of the public works system in the past, because they're now asking, what does the community need? And we may have been thinking about bricks and mortar or cement in this case in the past, but now we're thinking about the lives and how those lives experience what has been a disconnect, and making certain that this particular facility is able to be a reconnect and an enhancement and a healthy intervention for their lives.
Thank you. So reminder that if you have questions, you can tweet the questions to hashtag NPPF and include the phrase Peace by Design or Peace X Design. Have a couple questions from the audience. We'll see if we can see who wants to respond to those. But one questioner asked, how can people in their own communities bring peace when there is such a huge political divide in our country? And maybe I'll broaden that question. Political divide in the conversations that were tied to the Rondo Land Bridge and the Rondo community, the ongoing existence of the racial divide certainly came up, and then we've got the economic inequality that challenges us. And Elijah, you were talking a little bit about the risks that the economy poses to the cosmopolitan canopy.
Yes, well, I mean, it's clear that our country is moving through profound change economically right now, from manufacturing as a way to organize it, to service and high technology, all in the context of an increasingly globalized economy. And our poorest people, our poorest citizens, people living in these rather circumscribed areas, people who are without hope for the future oftentimes, are effectively competing with people living in the poorest parts of the world, you see. And this is not particular to their situations, but this is a more general problem because the middle class is losing ground. We have a kind of structural poverty that is a function of these changes, as it were. And one of the challenges is to help people, to acknowledge the fact that this change is going on, but also to help our citizens to make an effective adjustment to this transition. And one of the ways you do this is by doubling down on the provision of human capital, education and skills that will help people to work in this new economy, you see. This is extremely important here, because without that, I think the stresses and strains of our society that then get manifested in politics becomes ever more exacerbated by this economic inequality. I think we have to acknowledge that. I think we have to recognize that and begin to address these issues, because as we have these economic problems, as it were, great numbers of people not making an effective adjustment to this transition, you have more and more intolerance, you see, more and more frustration with your neighbors and that kind of thing. Little things become big things, and pretty soon you have civil unrest. We look at the the situation of Hurricane Irma, or what happened in Houston. And I must say that watching CNN or MSNBC and actually seeing citizens grapple with this, I mean, tears welled up in my eyes just to see black people and white people helping each other, reaching out. I mean, they weren't concerned about what color they were, they needed help. And people helped, you know. And that was very heartening to see that. At the same time, we have today in St. Martin's the specter of civil war, because the economy has just gone right out from under the people, as it were. And so clearly there's a message here for us that we have to deal with this issue. We have to deal with this issue. And I think we have to, as I say, I think it's very important for educational institutions and government and civic institutions to double down on this message of the need for the human capital so people can make this effective adjustment to the changes that are going on. And we need to petition the corporations and others to double down on the kinds of decisions and activities that might help to alleviate some of these problems as well.
Are there other thoughts on the effect that the divides have as barriers to peacemaking in our communities? Tom?
Well, ideology kills innovation, and as long as we continue to have these kind of ideological divides in our country, be they political or what have you, it just inhibits our ability to imagine a better and different future. And the other thing about that is that it seems like the media likes to play up these divisions, when in fact, as we saw the last 2 days in Rondo, when people actually sit face to face and work on common problems, they find that there's actually much that they share. And so I think that we have to move away from these grand abstractions, are you a blue state or a red state or what have you, these things that pit us against each other and bring us together in engagement around real practical issues where in fact people have a lot to share with each other.
Kim?
Yeah, I would agree with what I'm hearing on both sides of me here. Community and the way a community is designed, I think, can help this. And I think, and that's what I was referring to earlier, having those places where people are together and face each other. We live in a world now where so much of our information comes from an echo chamber, and we're on social media, and we're alone, and we're in our bubble, and we're in our own car. And we don't spend enough time with humanity and with other people. And we need to rebuild those skills that we used to have of listening to each other, of respectfully disagreeing with each other, allowing someone to have a different opinion that you do and not turn your back on them and shut off relations. And I know in this really tough place we're at now, families have been divided, sometimes, you know, could be permanently, over political ideologies, which has gotten ridiculous. So it's appreciating civility and discussion and honing our listening skills and not being afraid of compromise. And we have kind of lost that in our political system and, you know, perhaps maybe even in our personal lives and in our communities, that compromise isn't a dirty word. It's part of, it means you've been listening to others and are respecting some of their concerns and willing to give a little bit in order to have harmony.
I would just say that communication design is so important, and that what we see today is a bad design. We know that that has to change, but even before the design of communication, this whole idea of civic engagement and the design of civic engagement is so important. You know, when you set a table for those who will come, and you find that those who most need to be there aren't, there's something wrong with the table. So we have to figure out how to create those inclusive designs for engagement. And it starts long before that table. It does start, even with the very young, in our educational systems, as we help young people learn to work with each other, to learn with each other, to work in groups, to appreciate differences. You know, that used to be a real popular thing to do. It should be again. I think we'll be rebuilding some of those skills for those young people we also have to be the examples. So doing very unnatural things of coming together with people of different views and really being able to sit down and talk to each other can be a start. And that's something that each one of us can do. It doesn't require huge design, but it does require going out of our way because we just don't come together in that way across different views and perspectives and communities, and we must. That's a small piece that I think each of us can do.
So one of Elijah's case studies for the Cosmopolitan Canopy is the Reading Terminal Market in Philadelphia. And maybe you could talk a little bit about what makes you think of that as an example of a cosmopolitan canopy, and then how can the lessons of that be applied in the Twin Cities? A similar question to Kim in terms of the kinds of things that Rochester's doing. How can that apply in other cities, since one of our other divides that we're facing is the rural and urban divide, and how can the ideas that you're trying out in Rochester apply elsewhere? So I'm going to ask the two of you to respond to that question.
Yeah, well, the Reading Terminal Market is really a disused, let's just say a former disused train shed for the old Reading Railroad. And over time, over the past 100 years, you've seen the emergence of shops and kiosks and various services under this big roof. And for a long time, it's been this space where different kinds of shop owners and folks to come to sell and to shop. I mean, there's a beer garden there, there's a shoe shine stand, there's a down-home diner, there are green groceries, where Asian people have their, vegetables and all. There's a German meat setting there. And all different kinds of people use this space. Black people, white people, poor people, well-to-do people. You see them there in the holidays and on Saturdays, and it's a real wonderful, wonderful space. And sometimes when you're feeling a little down, you can just go and get a dose of humanity in the positive sense by just visiting this space, as it were. And it's clear that, as I suggested or indicated in my opening remarks, there are people who are deeply, deeply ethnocentric in this space, and people who are deeply, deeply cosmopolitan in this space. But the rule, the dominant rule, is cosmopolitanism and civility. And you see some of the most ethnocentric seeming people acting in very cosmopolitan ways. One day after lunchtime, about 2 in the afternoon, 2:30 in the afternoon, I was in Pearl's Oyster Bar there, sitting right by the front of the place, having some of that bad oyster soup, I was working, So. I was reading the paper. About 7 or 8 of us were sitting around Pearl's Oyster Bar, a mixed crowd. And there were 2 Irish working class fellows sitting at one space, and they had their boots, their construction boots on, and clearly Irish fellows. And it was kind of rainy in the afternoon there, and this black woman, elderly, was trying to get into the doors, the double doors, and during the busy time, the doors would have been swinging and open, but she had to negotiate this door, and she had a walker, I think. And this Irish fellow jumped up and rushed to the door and helped her in, I mean, really took great care with her. And she negotiated her way in, and everybody's kind of watching this out of the corner of their eye. In a sense, he's modeling something very important to the canopy, you see. And when he finishes, she says, "Thank you, son, thank you." And then he nodded, and she ambled off, and he sat back down with his friend. But I know as a black person, and given my sense of Philadelphia, that if I would wander into Kensington, the Irish community, a guy like that might be discouraging to me for just walking around, if you know what I mean. It's just my sense, my stereotype, if you will. And yet, here's a man who is effectively treating this woman as though she's his blood kin, you know. And he was modeling for all of us. And this is just one instance of this kind of behavior here, you see. You have I could give you other stories of working, ordinary folks behaving in these very tolerant and accepting kinds of ways, if you follow me. There's something about this space that is almost magical. And as I say, there are well-to-do people, and there are working people, there are black and white, and everybody sort of knows that this is a place for all kinds of people, that everybody is welcome here, you know, and they make that real. And not only is it going on in this space, but it's also kind of infectious, you see, because you can have this attitude, this point of convergence, as it were, and it spreads to other places in Center City, Philadelphia. There are other spaces. So there's a way in which various little canopies, whether they're Starbucks restaurant or other kind of place, they play off of one another. And there's a kind of synergistic effect, which in time creates a kind of cosmopolitan zone, as it were, that is Center City, Philadelphia, you see. And the Rittenhouse Square area, which is about 5 blocks away, is very similar, only it's a park. And there are other spaces I can mention too. And Philadelphia has about 6 of these major canopies. Of course, New York City, every other street corner is like a canopy in a sense, if you follow me. And New Haven has about 2, you know, you know. But the various cities have these spaces. And I think what we have to do, and I like the opening comment that you made, how do we grow these? How do we grow these? It's almost like a rhetorical question, because it's a difficult question and it's an easy question at the same time, you know, because these spaces are organic essentially, and but we have to provide the conditions in which they can emerge and persist and be there for people. And I think that's a real problem that we have to kind of think about and try to deal with as a society, because we have much more in common than we have things that separate us, really, I believe, as human beings. And we have to not only educate our children about this, but we have to promote this idea of the canopy. I think people are waiting for that kind of message, I believe.
Well, I think this idea of the organic canopy is really interesting, and I do think one way we can create something that isn't necessarily organic, but it can happen organically if we create the environment for which that can grow. And I think that's what, if I understand correctly, what you're suggesting. And yeah. I hope our community can do something like that. That's the challenge in front of us. How do we take a downtown area and with this infrastructure dollars, turn it into a place that's a good place for everyone? Mm-hmm. And you know, your question, Steve, about how do we take this concept, what we're doing in Rochester, which is creating a sustainable city center, which is taking the cars out of the city center, putting them on the periphery, create transit to bring people into the city center, make it walkable and bikeable. And the challenges of just making a community bikeable, we have actually quite wide sidewalks, and we had some Danish visitors in town yesterday who were commenting on, why don't you have bike lanes? Where are your bike lanes on your huge sidewalks? And yet we have a city ordinance that says you can't ride bikes on sidewalks, and there's a huge fear that a bike might actually touch a human, you know, that as it goes by. They're afraid of that. It's a culture change for us in our community, but how can we take the struggles that we're gonna go through and change those into the rural communities? I think is something that's I don't have an answer for that. I know in listening to this discussion and having grown up in Nebraska, where it's a pretty homogenous, society, there's a lot of small towns, and people fear what they don't know. And in our community, we don't want to have sections of town. We want to have a homogeneous community because everybody lives everywhere and we're together all the time, and so we don't fear each other, we love each other, and we care for each other. And Rochester's always had that, but it's been, we've had a lot of international visitors as well as international physicians and other healthcare providers in town, but it was a small, handful of people relative to the rest of the community. Now that's changing. How do we take it to a bigger scale and make sure that we develop something that's welcoming and everybody is everywhere all the time?
So there's another question from the audience regarding resources. And since a county is responsible for assembling resources, Tony, what do you see as the opportunity for devoting resources to the kinds of redesign towards peace that you were talking about? What maybe, quickly, the barriers and what we can do about them?
I'm glad you started with that, Steve. Counties are responsible for assembling resources and for using them mostly in very prescribed ways. And so sometimes our community is telling us what is needed, and we have a responsibility to react in a program way, whether it's built infrastructure, roads and bridges, or in a human services kind of way to provide for those needs, but in very prescribed ways. So the funding that we get from the federal government, from the state government, dictates in many cases the ways in which we can respond, build, or provide services. We are working very hard with our community for the kind of flexibility and partnership with our government partners, the federal and state government, to do what our community says needs to be done. Sometimes today it takes going out and partnering with others. I'll give an example of that in the workforce arena, where the dollars come down from the WIOA, which is the new law for Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. That's what WIOA stands for. We have so many prescriptions for how those dollars are used that today, even though we know we need sector partnerships and we need to make sure that the youngest to the more mature are in pathways that lead to the living wage jobs that are there today, we have difficulty supporting, for example, connecting those dollars to people who receive services or funding, what we used to call welfare funding through our county. You would think that there would be a match. We have people that are receiving financial resources who need work. So we should be able to use the temporary assistance for needy families dollars and the WIOA dollars in common, but we can't. We have a lot of difficulty with that. So partnerships with our business community and philanthropy and others right now are helping us to design a regional framework to combine, to advocate for, and to find the kinds of dollars and to be able to use them to do the work that we need to do. I can talk about that if we're talking about a road or a bridge or transit, and the fact that my community needs design elements that aren't necessarily funded, in those pots of dollars. So today we have to assemble the dollars in many creative ways. We probably always will have to, but we also need to make certain that we raise our voices so that the dollars we're receiving to do those very functions can be flexible. People think it means more dollars. It doesn't always mean that. It just means using them in different ways to accomplish the needs of our communities. So I hope that answers your question.
We'll find out from the audience member who posed that.
Oh, yeah.
So, Tom, Elijah told a great story about the Reading Terminal Market. One of the things we heard in the design dialogues the last day and a half was about the role of stories.
Right.
And maybe you could talk about ideas you've seen where communities have done a good job of creating spaces or time for people to tell their stories across difference.
Well, actually, the Reading Terminal reminds me of our own global market here on Lake Street, which is another example of places that bring lots of different people together. You know, I think that this is actually, we're sitting in a university, right? I mean, we don't always appreciate the value and the importance of these institutions to bring people from around the globe to have the very kinds of conversations that are going on right now. And I think that, you know, our universities are understandably very focused on delivering knowledge and churning out people with degrees, but actually I think the most important education happens in all of the in-between spaces, in the conversations with peers, in the conversations with faculty, and simply the ability to create these kinds of safe spaces for difficult conversations. And I think as we move forward in the world, higher ed and universities have got to recognize that that may be one of the most important things that they have to do in the world, more so even than giving degrees to students.
And gets harder if you try to do it totally online.
Yes.
There's a sense in which
Elijah?
there's a sense in which the university strives to be a canopy.
Right.
On a good day,
It's
it's a canopy.
Yep.
You know, where all different kinds of people are there, respecting one another's contributions and what have you.
So we were preceded for our panel by a courageous group of young people. So maybe the best way to close our conversation is to ask, what's the role, what's the opportunity for young people in designing more peace into our communities so that we can have more peaceful cities? And Tony, we'll start with you and work this way.
I really do think that young people are the key transformative element. And their role, I believe, has always been and will always be to push us, to elevate us, to be our very best selves, especially at a time like this where their presence is so needed. We really have to design ways for them to be able to lift up their voices. Coming up in St. Paul pretty soon, we'll have Dr. Bernice King coming into town. Ujamaa Foundation, one of our nonprofits, brought her, and other organizations and systems are joining together to have young people in her midst, to learn that the importance of nonviolence today is just as critical as ever. And so to learn through those principles of nonviolence how to have these difficult conversations, and to, as young people, then apply those age-old skills but that are just as needed and just as effective today, I think will push us forward. And I so appreciate that young people are here all over this audience today and participating in acting toward peace.
So I have 2 grandchildren, and as I watch them on the playground, I realize that children don't care about the color of your skin or whether you're rich or poor. In fact, we teach hate. We teach these kinds of things to them because we are not born that way. And so they also are much more creative. We have an educational system that's drummed all our creativity out of us. You go to the playground, children are constantly creative. So we are born as playful, creative species, and we have got to learn from children. It's not they have things to learn from us, but we have far more to learn from them these days.
How do you follow that? Absolutely, and so I guess I'll take a different twist on it. Yes, we absolutely need to include young people in our decision making, in our what we want our community to be. But I would challenge those young people to not push aside the older generation, to work together, because the older senior folk in your community have a lot of experience and a lot of love for their communities, and they want to share that with you. They don't want to be pushed aside. So I would challenge the young people to try that.
And I would just add very briefly, participatory processes. And I think that that's what Reconnect Rondo and a lot of the work that's happening in Rondo, why it is so hopeful, because it really is opening up the door for all sorts of voices, including youth, to actually be at the table before deciding what the what is. And instead of coming in and saying, hey, we're going to build a highway and you get to pick the color of the fence.
Elijah?
Well, in my book, I talk about, of course, the cosmopolitan canopy, and you can get it from Amazon. But
Got mine.
I want to say this. The canopy is a beautiful space. It really is. And as I said, it's an island of civility located in a sea of racial segregation. Philadelphia has a storied past, and this is a part of the past. I mean, Philadelphia is the 9th most segregated city in the country, and yet we do have these spaces, these civil spaces. And we also have the fault lines of the canopy. The canopy has fault lines. And which means that in certain circumstances, the canopy can become rented, as it were. It's not all peaches and cream. And the source of this renting of the canopy is often race. It's race. And no one is more problematic to the canopy than the young black male. You see, the young black male is associated with the iconic ghetto. The iconic ghetto. And the iconic ghetto, the point here is that the ghetto today, every city in America has a so-called black side of town. And not only is there the ghetto of what used to be the ghetto, but there's the image of the ghetto. There's the symbol of the ghetto, you see. And black people of different classes and positions symbolize the ghetto under the canopy. Yeah, people have to negotiate and pass inspection, and when they do, things are cool. But sometimes these young people are not even people don't get to know them at all. They just fear them. There's fear, you see. And this has to be dealt with. And I have made a career of looking not only at these public spaces, but I've actually gone into communities and spent real time with young people in the inner city poor communities. And great numbers of these young people who have been hit very hard by this economic change I talk about, of not being able to make an effective adjustment to the transition. Many of these young people are in bad shape. And and the common theme is that so many of these young people at ground zero in the poor sections of the inner city lack a sense of future, a positive sense of future. It may be one thing for the middle class, one thing for the upper middle class, children, young people, in terms of their future. But a lot of these inner city young people do not have a positive sense of the future, which then has implications for their behavior today. But not only that, the people of the larger society are oftentimes associating them and every other black person until she proves they're different, with the iconic ghetto, you see. You see? So this is a very important point I'm making here. I mean, the young people are important. And I think this country has to double down on trying to make the canopy space and by implication civil society more receptive to these young people. Otherwise, we just continue the problems that we have with race and inequality and everything else, you see. I address this in the book, and I talk about it in my previous book, Code of the Street, which goes into great depth about these issues. But I think that when we talk about young people and what they can do and what they can contribute, we've got to take very seriously the plight of the inner city young folks. So I want to say that.
Thank you. So I think all 5 of our panel members have demonstrated that regardless of generation, it's possible to continue to work to create hope for future generations, for future communities. So please join me in thanking them for their And we will exit the platform so that our chief organizer can take over for the final logistics comments.
Okay, well, thank you. The program.
Yeah, we have to go out that way. Thank you.
Jordan.
Well, it has been a wonderfully rich, long day. My favorite comment that I got as I was walking around upstairs in Kennedy earlier this afternoon from one of our students was, he said, "This is like Christmas." There was just so much to do and see and learn, and it's been really fun to be wandering around, seeing these rooms packed with people who are clearly engaged and learning and excited about their what the panelists have been talking about, and I just couldn't be more grateful to all of the speakers and the panelists, including, of course, the group that has just shared their insights about peace by design. So thanks again to Steve and Commissioner Carter, and to Tom and Professor Anderson, and to Kim Norton. I would like to take this time to very quickly recognize, and with deep gratification, our main sponsors for this event, the University of Minnesota, who has been a key partner in this work for the last several years, and we look forward to many more of opportunities to work together in organizing these kinds of events. To Sanford Health, who was very instrumental in bringing together the conversations on global health, to some of our other academic partners like Pacific Lutheran University, and some of our new partners. It's been really fun to welcome in groups from the University of Denver, from Juniata College, from Cal State Sacramento, and even a group that's come all the way from Hawaii to join us for this. So if you wouldn't mind, a round of applause for all of that, all of our sponsors. It again is really an amazing community effort to bring this all together. A couple quick announcements, and then we're going to head outside for a final sort of closing ceremony for those that want to join us. At 6:30, there will be a performance of this amazing, really powerful play about human rights and women's rights called Silence is Health. It was performed last night and will be performed again this evening. If you'd like to go to that, you'll want to be in the chapel area, the Foss Atrium over there. And the play starts at 6:30, but you'll want to get there by 6 or 6:15 at the latest, because there's limited seating for that. A reminder that there will be the Peace Concert following that at about 8 o'clock in the chapel for those that are here on campus and in town, and that will be with our good friends Cien Años, as well as these wonderful artists who are visiting us from New York City, the Project 2030, this group of artists that is lifting up the mission and the values of the Sustainable Development Goals and using art to connect to youth who are interested in that work. And they'll be joined as well by a group from Chicago that have been helping with part of this art exhibit, the NIAM, National Youth Arts Movement, I think it is, and some of the posters that they put up there. Again, please, if you haven't already, check out the amazing Concentric Dialogues art exhibits and installations around campus. They'll be up tomorrow as well. And if you didn't have enough to do already, there is, for those 21 and over, the cocktails at the castle at the American Swedish Institute. That starts at 7. So a nice, relaxing evening. It should be a lovely, lovely event down there. And if you would like, there's a shuttle bus, a vintage old bus, that is donated or provided by the Minnesota Transportation Museum that will be outside of the Courtyard Minneapolis Downtown Hotel at 6:15. Let me make sure I get this right. 6:15. We'll depart at 6:30, okay? So if you're staying at the hotel or want to ride down, that will go down. It will also bring you back to the hotel at the end of the evening. Tomorrow morning, we'll be back on campus. We start with breakout sessions. So at 9:30, you'll be in different locations around campus. And again, a rich array of programming to choose from. So again, you'll have some tough choices to make, but no bad ones. And then we will meet back here in this hall for the opening plenary at 11:15 with Representative Gabrielle Giffords and Captain Mark Kelly, who will be talking about their work on trying to reduce gun violence in this country. And we really look forward to hearing their remarks. We will have for the closing plenary, it's been kind of exciting to see how that's come together, but we have Senator Amy Klobuchar, Representative Keith Ellison, and our own Arctic explorer and otherwise a wonderful human being, Anne Bancroft, as well as a sort of celebration of local peacemakers. So you can look forward to that. And you are now invited to join us if you have the time and don't need to just rush right out for a closing ceremony that will be a tree blessing. It will take place at the rotunda outside of the Hagfors Center for Science, Business, and Religion. It's this brand spanking new building. It's not even quite done yet. And yesterday, they put an amazing tree in the ground right out front of it. It was quite the operation. And so we're going to walk over there and have a little ceremony to acknowledge that act of great hopefulness, of great significance. I think there's something really wonderful about planting a tree. And so we're going to go recognize that as an act of faith, an act of peace building in the city here as we close out. There will be an interfaith processional party that will greet you as you leave the hall, and we will walk over to the site. You'll be led by those faith leaders. There will be a ceremony there involving a number of different blessings and songs, and you'll have a chance to help with watering the tree if you would like to. And of course, there'll be some music from Cien Años to send us on our way as we leave that space. As you enter that space, there will be some representatives of the Native American community with smudge sticks to sort of mark that as a sacred space and to cleanse that space. You're welcome to walk by and be smudged. If you would prefer not to, you would simply put your hand up on your shoulder, and that's a sign that you'd prefer not to have the smudging. Or you can just walk into the space. We should be done there about 5:45 or so. You can come and go as you need to for that. And then from there, off to the evening, and we will see you back here tomorrow morning. Thanks again, and have a lovely evening.